They once said the sun never sets on the empire, and the statement stood true for about a century and a half. And the reason was the mighty army of the British Empire. But now the UK's defence forces are weak. Tobias Ellwood, a senior Conservative MP, has asked the government to reverse the cuts and be on a war footing in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war. The statement comes in the backdrop of reports of a senior US general telling Defence Secretary Ben Wallace that the British Army is no longer regarded as a top-level fighting force. Last year, Britain approved downsizing of its army by 10,000 personnel, bringing the effective number to a mere 72,500. This comes as the UK is supplying weapons and support to Ukraine in the ongoing war against Russia. Meanwhile, the Commons Defence Select Committee has set up a subcommittee to look at the problems regarding modernisation of the UK's heavy armoured vehicles. The committee will be chaired by former Armed Forces Minister Mark Francois. The current budget is about $57 billion a year, the second largest in NATO after the United States. But given the threat of the Ukraine war spilling over into Europe, and there are threats from China, North Korea and Iran as well, these were identified last year in Britain's high-level defence strategy, the Integrated Review. Experts are calling for expanding the defence budget, but the Rishi Sunak government is on a tight purse. There are demands by the worker unions to raise their pay. The strikes for higher wages are already adding to the enormous strain on the British economy. Rishi Sunak has distanced himself from the pledges made by his predecessor, Liz Truss, as far as hiking the defence spending from 2 to 3% of the UK GDP is concerned. For more on this story, we're now joined by Mike Buckley, senior journalist and political commentator in Sheffield, England. Thanks very much for speaking to WION. Now, how would you react to the comments that are being made by Ellwood and others, a stark warning that has been issued over the dire state of the British Army?
Well, as your listeners may know, the British government we've had for the last 13 years has underinvested in many parts of our country, including our health service, our education, our public transport, but also including the army and defence more generally. That, in some ways, was understandable, given how the world was for most of the last decade. But at the same time, we always knew that things were not going to stay safe. So it was a short-term financial saving, money-saving measure that has again got the UK into trouble. So we're in big trouble with our health service, for example. Lots of people needlessly sick and indeed dying because the health service isn't as good as it used to be. And the same is true with security and defence. Lack of investments over the last 15 years has led to the position where we are now, which, as your commentator, as you were just saying, key people in the military, key people in Parliament now are saying that our military and our navy are not up to scratch, particularly because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which of course puts the whole of Europe, at risk, and in the end puts the UK at risk as well.
All right. Now, many would argue that the Ukraine war has cast a long shadow on all of Europe. There is no doubt that the Rishi Sunak government is under pressure on multiple fronts. Do you believe the UK government can afford to inject more funds for boosting the defence forces, as is being urged by experts? This, of course, comes at a time when the UK economy is going through a huge crisis, almost staring at a recession, and we've seen the multiple strikes taking place by union after union over wages and pay hikes.
Well, I would say two things in response to that. One, it is going to be very difficult for the UK government to invest sufficient funds in the military, in the army, in the navy and the air force, etc., to get enough equipment, to get enough weaponry, particularly because we've given a lot of weapons to Ukraine, and indeed to recruit more soldiers, naval officers and people for the air force as well. However, the other important point to make is that we don't have a choice. We're effectively at war with Russia. That war is going to continue for the foreseeable future. We hope that will stay contained to Ukraine, but we don't know that. I mean, we don't know what Putin is going to do. There were rumours that he may invade Moldova. He may indeed go further and invade, the EU or NATO. territory as a whole. So the UK needs to be prepared for that. So we have no option on spending the money. The government is in a very difficult situation, but they're only in a difficult situation because of the bad choices that they've made for the British economy in the last 13 years. So it really is up to them while they're still in power to get us out of the mess that they've got us into.
You think the British government has no choice but to really boost its defence spending. But as we're discussing, the Rishi Sunak government is clearly between a rock and a hard place. Apart from the ongoing war in Ukraine, you have issues with North Korea, with Iran. By Rishi Sunak's own admission, China poses the single biggest security threat to the world, including to the United Kingdom. Given this geopolitical reality and the economic reality at home, what are Rishi Sunak's options?
He needs to invest in the UK as a whole, and he needs to resolve the strikes very quickly, because the strikes, of course, are costing the whole economy money. They're costing lots of businesses money, and they're restricting our room for manoeuvre in terms of the economy. And indeed, a lack of investment in our economy is one of the things that's held it back. We've had historic low investments in all sectors of the economy, really, over the last 13 years, and that needs to turn around. And that means spending money now in order to enable us to grow the economy and create more money in the future, instead of sucking money out of the economy. He also needs to take steps to rebuild our trading relationship with Europe. So as your listeners may know, we left the European Union 3 years ago. The impact of that on the UK economy is a permanent 4 or 5% hit to GDP, which is a massive hit to the economy. He needs to undo some of the damage that's been done, which doesn't mean reversing Brexit, but it does mean taking action to reduce trade barriers. That's the number one thing that would improve our economy and enable our economy to get back on track.
All right, can Rishi Sunak get the economy back on track? That really is the million-dollar question. And if his approval ratings are anything to go by, it would seem like a majority of British people seem to think he's not doing a great job on that front. But thanks very much for speaking to WION and sharing your perspective with us on this crucial story.
Thank you.